Welcome to another edition of our Sunday Night Live at 5. Again, this topic will be a great topic for tonight. 5 common forms of manipulation, what they look like, how they differ between what I call toxic behavior and trauma behavior. There are 2 different sides to each one of these forms. And I want to make it clear that we don't have the ability to diagnose someone as having a behavioral disorder. This is not what this is about. And it's actually easier for you to get away from somebody and to take ownership of your side of it if you don't label them as something, as a narcissist or borderline personality disorder, or they're bipolar, or whatever you want to say that they are, because it makes it easier for you. We need to get away from that. We just need to say, what traits are they exhibiting? And is this a trait that I'm willing to put up with? And these 5 forms of manipulation, they do lead into a lot of things like narcissism, borderline personality disorder, and all that, but they are also very clear signs of other things that can be going on. There could be trauma behind it. There could be attachment wounds behind it. There could be just a difference in how we attach, emotional immaturity. There's lots of things that can cause these forms of manipulation. So I want to make it very clear that we're not here to diagnose people with this, okay? We're here to understand what manipulation looks like very early on, so I don't end up in a pattern where I'm with the same type of manipulating person over and over. I don't go back to somebody that is continually manipulating me either. Because manipulation, it's masked a lot of times as connection, as passion, as empathy, as other things, and it makes it look very enticing, like the person has good qualities. But once we dive into each one of the forms, you're going to see that, in all honesty, it's not healthy at all. It's not coming from a healthy root. And again, if that root is trauma, or that root is toxicity, it's going to be different. Now, me personally, I never use the word toxic unless it comes from an actual toxic behavioral disorder, such as borderline personality disorder, narcissism, grandiose personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder. One of the cluster B there, that is the ones that really have a hard time controlling emotion type stuff. So I don't like to diagnose people right off the bat. But if they look like they're more that way, it's a toxic behavior. If it comes from somewhere with trauma, whether childhood or previous relationships, it's a trauma-based manipulation tactic. So we're going to go over all of this stuff as we go in. It's like when charm turns controlling, right? And that's why I say it can look like passion. It can look like empathy. It can look like connection. And it's masked very easily. And that's why it works so well, because it gets us kind of flipped upside down. But if we know what to look for ahead of time, we typically have an easier time combating it so it doesn't take root on us. Because by us not combating it, by not setting boundaries, by not knowing how to communicate against it, we are going to allow that person in. But we can actually stop the manipulation right off the bat if we say, basically, we see what you're doing here in a way, and saying, I'm not going to play into this bait. Because in my opinion, manipulation is all a form of bait to get you to overextend into the relationship in a way. And so what we're going to talk about when we get into these 5 forms is how to kind of combat that, so that way it doesn't take root and we do not take the bait. Okay. So the number 1 form, and I think everyone will be nodding their head when they hear this, is my number 1 form is gaslighting. And to give you some history, right? Let's first define what it is. Gaslighting makes you question your memory, perception, emotional experience, right? It's trying to distort your perception of time, space, reality. It can even do your moral side on your ideas of right and wrong. It can change that too. It's any way that is meant to do that to you. Now, it comes from a movie called The Gaslight, where a man was trying to get access to his wife's, he was trying to get access to her money, essentially. And to do that, he wanted to have her committed to a psychiatric hospital by making her act crazy. So every night he would dim the gas light that was out front. So that way when she started coming out saying, I saw the gas light dim, he'd be like, no, you're not. To make her start to feel like she was crazy and she was hearing things and all sorts of stuff, so he could have her committed, so that way he could have access to her money. So he was trying to distort her perception of reality, of what was going on, to make her feel crazy. And that's what gaslighting at its core actually is. Now, in that case, in that movie, it was done with the intent malicious, right? And so when we look at what gaslighting is, it doesn't always have to have malicious intent, but what it does have to have, like if we want to call it toxic, is the malicious intent. People can gaslight without actually knowing they're doing it out of a emotional immaturity and needing to control the situation. They can do it for various reasons, right? So why do people do it in the first place, right? Well, the first one is to avoid accountability. They don't want to be accountable for their behavior, right? So you catch them in something and they're going to gaslight you and they're going to lie and manipulate out of it so they don't have to actually take accountability for what behavior they did has actually hurt you. So they're trying to avoid that accountability. They're also trying to control the narrative, right? By controlling the narrative, they dysregulate you as the victim, so to speak, to where you now have to, your version of reality is all based on what they see. Because as this goes on and longer, they are able to control that narrative to where you don't even know which way is up anymore. So you have to rely on this person for everything, for all the details. Did this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen? And that's what throws us upside down because they're controlling that narrative, right? They want to control how others perceive them in a lot of ways, right? They use it to be able to dismiss emotional needs. So when you bring up your feelings, they don't want to deal with those feelings because in a lot of people, emotions are hard to deal with another person, especially if I'm the one that's causing it. So they don't want to deal with that. So what do? They try to direct your attention to somewhere else and act like it didn't even happen. And they're doing that so that way they don't have to worry about your emotional needs. They can just dismiss them and it makes it easier, right? They use it to protect their ego, right? They don't want to see themselves as bad. And a lot of times when it's from a toxic place, so like a toxic behavior, they're doing it specifically to control you, to be able to isolate you, to be able to control the narrative so that way they can continue to be the one and only person that you go to for reality. But in somebody that's emotionally immature, it may be because they don't want to see themselves as bad. So their brain's going to fracture and they're going to start lying to you and gaslighting you because they don't want to admit the reality is that they're a bad person. This happens a lot when we have somebody that's cheated. And immediately when someone cheats, we're always like, oh, they're a narcissist. You know, that's all they care about themselves. When in actuality, there might be something behind that's going on that's caused them to cheat. And then they're going to lie about it and say, no, that didn't happen. I didn't sleep with her. I didn't do that. And they're doing that not because they're trying to control and manipulate. They don't want to admit it because as soon as they admit it, then they're going to feel the shame from it. And they don't want to do that. So it's an avoiding of the accountability and to protect their ego all at the same time. So there's a lot of things in there that kind of wrap itself around. So how does this even develop in the first place, right? So they have a toxic pattern. So we're going to have a toxic pattern or a trauma pattern, right? In the toxic pattern, it's chronic denial or revision of the truth. They don't want to face their own reality, and so they have to change yours in order to not face their own reality. Because if they admit that they did the bad thing, then they have to admit that they're the bad person. They don't like having to do that. So they don't want that accountability. So it's that chronic denial. And over time, it roots into them because it becomes part of their personality, right? They have zero remorse. That's part of the how it develops. They just don't care. They have zero remorse for what's happened. And a lot of times it comes because that's how they've seen other people in their family dynamic react to things. So they are literally just repeating patterns they have seen in life. And it's become a pattern that's just how they operate in life. Okay. And then a toxic pattern, it's used to control and destabilize, right? So it develops using techniques that are there to control and manipulate because again, they don't want to face the reality. They don't want their ego bruised or anything like that. In wounded people, it comes from high shame environments. So if they've grown up where they are shamed for bad grades, they are shamed for body image, right? They're shamed for all these things. It can come out as that because they now can view themselves in a very different way. And it's not that they actually have a narcissistic personality. It's that they have, like, for example, body dysmorphia. When I look at myself in the mirror, I have been diagnosed with body dysmorphia. Not like I'm just using this term and throwing it out there. But very early on in my life, I was shamed for being too small, too little. I wasn't going to play sports. I wasn't going to be big. I was never going to be strong. I wasn't going to be able to, defend myself. And I had all that stuff thrown at me from some of my high school coaches. And because of that, it gave me this image, much like an anorexic or bulimic person that looks in the mirror, even if they're skinny, they see a fat person. I look in the mirror and I see a skinny person because of the amount of shame that's come on me. So In a wounded person, they don't want their reality shaken. So if there's anything that goes against their reality of how they see themselves, they're going to gaslight you against it. And it's because their brain is trying to protect themselves from the reality. It is not a behavioral disorder. That is literally them just not being able to face their trauma that has caused this issue. Okay. Now, there's also a fear of being blamed or rejected, right? So they don't, and again, that goes back to the avoiding accountability. The toxic person avoids accountability because they don't think they actually are wrong. The wounded person does it because they don't want to appear wrong. And there is a difference in how that comes out. The narcissist, the borderline personality literally believes to their core that they are not responsible and they are not wrong. So they are justified in lying and gaslighting because they are never wrong. Whereas the toxic or the non-toxic person, the person that's gone through trauma, they're doing it because they're trying to avoid it. Their brain knows that there's trauma there. Their brain knows that there's accountability, and it's trying to avoid it. It's trying to look the other way. And so to do that, they lie in order to cover their tracks, so to speak, because they're ashamed of what's going on. And let's be clear, a narcissist won't ever feel shame, right? So the trauma person does it from a place of avoiding shame. The toxic person does it because they literally just think they're right and they're trying to control you. And that's the big difference between the two of them. So just because somebody gaslights does not mean that they are automatically going to be considered a narcissist. But if they gaslight, we have to dig deeper to understand it. But even still, if they're gaslighting, it does not matter if it's coming from a place of trauma or it's coming from a place of toxicity, right? We have to handle it the same, and we have to set boundaries the same, and we have to back away the same. So how does it look early in dating? Because most people will tell you that gaslighting starts as like really small stuff, and it slowly grows throughout the relationship to where they're telling you bigger and bigger things, right? And so we've got to look at what does it sound like very, very early on, right? And it may just sound like the most harmful, meaningless types things. That's not what I said. You're twisting it. And again, we got to be careful. Don't take these terms and be like, oh, yeah, he's totally narcissistic. He's totally gaslighting. That's not always the case. You may actually be twisting it, right? And we have to make sure we do the hard look to make sure when someone says, like, that's not what I said, you're twisting it, right? And say, did I twist it or is my reality good, right? And this comes from what a lot of times I tell people is if you think you're being gaslit, start writing details down. To really see if we're being gaslit, we write the details down right after an event happens, and then we go back and we have a conversation about it a couple weeks later, and then we're going to see if they're gaslighting, because they change major details on how something happens a week later or so, then we know that they're gaslighting. But if they don't really do that and they're saying you're twisting it, it may not be that, right? But if I've written down my stuff, I can actually reference it when they say something later. I can go back and I have something to reference. I don't condone using voice recorders or video cameras or anything like that to record to see what's going on unless you're already in this and you're in like a toxic marriage and you're trying to get out of it. Like sometimes recording will help you in a court environment, but early on you shouldn't be doing that. If you in your brain are feeling like you have to record yourself early on in a relationship in like the first month or two, that's probably a relationship we don't want, we don't need, we need to walk away from. So some other things that they can say is you're too sensitive, you're remembering it wrong, you're overreacting, calm down, anything along those lines. It's going to sound almost meaningless at first. But if we look at all of those phrases, they're all you're too sensitive, you're this. So it's going to be a form of projection right off the bat. You're being too sensitive. You're not remembering it right. You're overreacting. That didn't happen, right? It's projection. It's telling you that you are doing something wrong. If I were to tell you that I don't like it didn't happen that way, I wouldn't say you're seeing it wrong or you're a problem. I'll say I don't remember it happening that way. And I would ask questions to try to understand their side of it. And we have to understand that you can actually video record somebody, a couple talking, and then ask one person what was said, and they'll say it was this. You'll ask this person what was said, and it was this, and neither of them are actually what actually was said. So we have to understand that there is perspective shift, but it's how that person approaches it. And again, I would approach it and I'd say, I don't remember it that way. What details are different in your mind than what happened? And usually if I can't come to an agreement on what happened, I'll just be like, okay, well, we can remember it differently as long as we have a solution going forward. That's the difference between what looks like manipulation and what looks healthy. Okay. So we have to understand that right off the bat. So, some behavioral cues we can be looking for early in dating are anytime they minimize your emotions. So again, if you've told me that you don't remember it that way, and I say I don't remember it that way either, let's come to an agreement so that way we can both feel comfortable. I'm not minimizing your emotions, but if I'm telling you nope, it definitely didn't happen that way, you're wrong, you're just crazy, something along those lines, then that is them minimizing your emotions. Okay. They're going to revise conversations, right? They're going to twist it, and they're going to twist it. They will typically do things where they'll change a word, somewhere in there, because a lot of times, like say, narcissists use half truths. People that gaslight use half truths. They're going to use all the truth except for this one detail that makes it completely out of context. So if they continually revise that conversation, and you have found yourself having a conversation and they've revised it once, the next time you come to it, they revised it again, where it's now this happened, now this happened. There is some form of manipulation going on there. But again, doesn't mean narcissist. It may mean their brain is now starting to remember details, because in a lot of times for people that have been through trauma, that our fight or flight is activated very, very early on in a system like this, a lot of times we won't be able to remember in the moment what was going on. So you may ask somebody an hour later the details of the conversation, they can't remember. Ask them 24 hours later, and they're going to remember much more details. Ask them 3 days later, and they may even remember more, because our brain blocks off our memory a lot of times in the initial moments afterwards, because it's trying to protect itself. It's trying to actually get out of the abuse that's going on. So just because they revise the conversation doesn't mean that they're gaslighting. But when they, again, make it accountable to you, it's always what you said, or you did this, or I didn't say that kind of stuff. But when we start saying, well, I'm starting to remember other details, again, it's how they approach that, right? It's not just revising the conversation, it's how they revise it and blaming you for it, essentially. They're also going to act like you're irrational for expressing discomfort, right? A lot of times what I hear is, well, you're responsible for your own feelings. I didn't say that, but if it made you feel that way, I'm sorry it made you feel that way, right? If they apologize, it's always like, I'm sorry you feel that way. It's not, I'm sorry I did that to you. It's, I'm sorry you feel that way. Okay. So they're going to act like you're irrational, you're crazy, things like that. So how do we respond to that kind of manipulation? Well, one of the biggest things I say is it's always bait, whether it's a trauma response or a toxic response. It is going to be a way that we are baited into a conversation, because on either side of it, dysregulation is the key to what this manipulation is doing. It's dysregulating us so that way I don't know which way is up or down. And so the only way to not play into it is, if I remember the details different, is to stick to my guns that I do not remember it that way, right? And leave it at that. I don't want to overextend into my response. I'm going to say things like, I trust what I felt, even if you remember it differently, right? And I may say something like, we are remembering it differently. I don't remember it happening that way, and that's okay. Very short. I don't have to get into an explanation. I don't remember that way because when you said this and this, and we don't need to go into all that. We just need to set that I remember it differently. And if they continue to poke and try to gaslight you more, because what I always say is a narcissist will double down, whereas a person that is in trauma will kind of back off of it. But if we like, hey, you know what? We remember it differently. That's okay. Let's just move on to something else, or move on to the solution to it. And if they don't, and they double down and they start gaslighting you again, see, this is why you're crazy. This is why I can't deal with you. Or that right there is telling you that they are trying to manipulate you in that case. And that's where they're trying to bait you in. So the gaslighting itself didn't work. So then I try to bait you in further into it if I did dysregulate you. Restate the same thing. Well, I see that we just don't remember it right. I'm exiting this conversation now. I don't even want to talk about a solution. I'm just done with this conversation. We can either talk about something else, or I'm just going to go about my day. Something along those lines, right? Don't ever argue for your truth. Just stand in it. And standing in it isn't arguing. It is just stating that your truth is different. That's it. State your truth, walk away. If they want to continue on and you don't want to exit the conversation, you can say things like noted. Like that's good information to know. Thank you for your opinion, right? Just kind of go right back at them with nothing that is we call it gray rocking, with an emotionally neutral response. You're not agreeing with them or disagreeing with them. You're just saying, okay, I see what you're saying. And that's it. We don't have to agree or disagree, because gray rocking is the quickest way to get them to back down. A narcissist or anybody that's gaslighting, a manipulator of any sort, they know that if you respond positively, they know how to respond to that. If you respond negatively, they know how to respond to that. But when you are neutral, they don't know how to respond. A lot of times they have to like regather their thoughts to be able to figure out, how am I going to get past this? Okay. So again, just don't argue your truth, right? Keep mental and emotional receipts. This is where journaling is so extremely important. Write down what happened. That's your receipt of what happened, right? When you go to the store and you want to return something and you paid this amount for it and you don't have the receipt, they're going to give you the last sale price a lot of times. You have no proof of what actually happened. But at least if I go out of that conversation, I write my reality down right there, then I don't have to worry about later them changing details and me going, did that really happen? And I can go back to my conversation, my receipt that I have, and I can see what it was. And then when we're in there, we're writing down what happened and how it made us feel in the moment too. So that's that emotional receipt that we have for it. Okay. So a good discernment on whether or not it's a wound or manipulation, we can say if they reflect, apologize, and adjust, it's a wound. Typically, a person that has gaslit you and you call them out on it, like, hey, man, you're changing details here, right? If they double down and go into it, that's a problem, right? If they escalate, it's a problem. But if they're like, let me think on this for a minute, okay, they're reflecting. Or even if like things are heated in the moment and you guys go your separate ways for 24 hours, they come back to the look, I was thinking about it and I think you're right. You know, you really you got me, you called me out on it. It sucks, but you know you're right. And they apologize. I'm sorry I made you feel that way. That gaslighting is not coming from a place of toxicity. But again, if I haven't called it out and I haven't stood my ground, I will never find this out. So setting that boundary of, we're not going to communicate like this, we're not going to have this argument, is a clear way to see if they respect you. Because a narcissist, any behavioral disorder, honestly, is not going to respect you. They're going to double down, they're going to escalate, they're going to deny, they're going to blame you. That's manipulation. So how they respond to us calling them out on that behavior, like, hey, you're changing details of what happened for it to suit you. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I remember it differently. I'm done with this conversation. 24 hours later, if they're still poking at it, trying to get you to talk about it and, denying it and, blaming you even more, then it's a problem. But if they reflect and apologize, say, look, man, maybe I just remember it wrong. I don't know, but I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Then it's clearly probably coming from a wound and not from that. Emotional immaturity doesn't always have to mean that they actually don't know their emotions. It means that a lot of times they have no nervous system regulation in the moment, so they're going to manipulate in order to get past it, if that makes sense. So again, it's one of those patterns that we have to, nip in the bud very, very early on. If I start seeing it, I start getting that gut feeling that I'm being gaslit and I call it out, and they get worse about it, that's just clear sign not to get away from this person. But if they're able to take accountability, then there might be some deeper work that has to be done to get rid of whatever trauma it is so they can get past whatever it is and the reason why they feel the need to manipulate you instead of being open and honest. You may not be providing a safe space for them to be open and honest, so they feel like they have to lie because otherwise you may abandon them. So we have to take accountability where we may be creating this need for them to do that based on how we are putting up a wall to where they don't feel comfortable to communicate their emotions. So we got to be real careful with these. This is why I tell people, find a coach, find a therapist, find a friend that you can bounce this stuff off of that can see it from a truly clear perspective to make sure that you're not missing something in this. I typically say find a therapist or a coach because we are trained in how to actually combat these things. And I'm going to know the right questions to ask you to see if it's something that you may be partially causing. Doesn't mean that they're absolved of their behavior, but I might be able to see if you're causing part of it by throwing gasoline on a fire. They have the fire, they have a little flame, and you could be throwing gasoline on it or you could throw water on it. If you're throwing gasoline on it, that manipulation may feel a lot heavier than it actually is, but it comes from you not addressing it properly either, okay? So don't just point the finger at them and be like, they're manipulating me. Are you throwing gasoline on it to cause it more? All right, moving on to the next one. Next one gets mistaken a lot of times from a lot of different things. But triangulation, and this one is brutal when it comes to in toxic environments. This one is a go-to of pretty much every one of the behavioral disorders uses triangulation very, very heavily. What is triangulation? It's using third parties. This could be real or imagined. We can use imagined parties, imagine groups of people that they're doing. You'll see what I mean here in a minute, but they're using it to influence, guilt, or create competition within you to where you change your behavior based on it, right? They do it to create insecurity, right? Because they create you being insecure. You're going to look to them for security. So then they're going to feed you security so that way you feel better. So it's literally like you whip a dog so many times that dog looks to you and, oh, am I doing right? Am I doing right? Am I doing right? That's what they're doing by triangulation, right? They're doing it to elevate themselves, and they're doing it to manipulate your emotional responses. Okay. How does it work, right? Well, triangulation, a lot of times, like I guess the easiest way to kind of explain it is to just talk about what it kind of sounds like, right? So in my narcissistic relationship, she used to use, like, one, she isolated me. We were only allowed to go out with her friends. We were not allowed to go out with my friends. If we, if I was saying, hey, I got plans this week with my friends, I'd love for you to come along. She'd be like, well, I got plans with my friends and you can't abandon me. You have to go with me. Right there, that's a form of manipulation that we're not going to talk about tonight, but isolation is a major form of manipulation, because if they isolate you, they can control how you feel. They can control you completely with isolation. But a lot of these tactics are pushing you towards isolation. Gaslighting pushes you towards it because it makes you dependent on them for reality. Triangulation kind of does the same thing. So they're going to say things like, all my friends say you talk way too loud. That's what I heard all the time. We had to go out with her friends. And so then I would adjust it and I would not talk so loud the next time. Then she'd be like, what, you're not going to talk? People think that there's something wrong with you because you don't talk. Oh, now I can't talk. It was always a changing. I always call it the moving target. Toxic people will move the target every time. Even once you get it right exactly how they said the last time, there's a new target, because, again, it's not about you hitting a target to appease them. It's about them changing it so that way they can manipulate you and control you. So, again, you're going to hear things like, all my friends say this about you. They're going to say, a lot of people say I'm great in relationships, so you don't know what you're talking about, right? So if you're like, hey, you did this, whatever, and it hurt me, and they're gonna say, well, I've gone to therapy, and my therapist even says this. That's triangulation. But again, it can come from a place of trauma, or it can come from a place of toxicity. A toxic person is going to repeatedly abuse you with that same thing over and over. And again, it's going to be a moving target. A person that's doing it out of trauma is trying to relate to the situation somehow, and they may bring in their therapist. They may bring, I was talking to my mom, and she thinks that that's not a healthy thing to do. They're triangulating you, but again, because of the way they're triangulating you, and it's not going to be a habitual type thing, it's not coming from a place of toxicity. Again, they're doing it potentially to not be accountable for their behavior, but they're doing it in a way that is literally more protecting of them, and they're bringing someone in because they may have had a conversation with that person. That person may have actually said that. You weren't there for that conversation, so you don't know how it goes, but it's going to sound like they're trying to blame you for something that somebody else has told them is a good thing. Okay, so we got to be very careful of this, right? You might hear a guy say, well, other girls would love to be in your position. That one right there. These are early signs of what, will get worse, because most of these behaviors, if I catch them early on in the first month or two, they're going to sound really small like this, but they're going to grow into bigger things over time, right? And so we have to look out for other girls who love to be in your position. A lot of people say I'm great in relationships. My ex never made a big deal out of that. Right? When they say my ex, they're creating competition. They say, well, I gotta be better than their ex. And since their ex didn't have a problem with it, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I am. And so triangulation can do the same thing to us over time by disrupting our reality. Most forms of manipulation are a disruption of reality, of our distortion of what's right and wrong, a distortion of what happened, what didn't happen, things like that. Triangulation, again, though, is bringing any third party into the relationship. And again, you can see where it can be an imagined group. Other girls would love to be in your position. It doesn't have to be a real person, right? In my case, she used to use her friends. Rob says this, and this person says that, right? What's interesting is that I would say, okay, well, let me go apologize to him for that. Oh, no, you don't embarrass me like that. Don't break my confidence. Okay, I won't. And that's where they've got you now, because now you can't say anything to find out what the reality is. Because if you do say something, now you look like the crazy one for asking. So in my case, after the relationship ended, I met one of the guys in the gym, and I was like, hey man, I'd just like to apologize for, all the times that we were out and I talked too loud. And he was like, no man, we loved having you around. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, that's when I started to realize that she had triangulated me a lot of times, and that everything she was saying about me wasn't reality. It was something that she was putting into my brain to make me more agreeable to her way of doing things. So it's very, very insidious when that happens, okay? So when this develops, right, the toxic pattern versus the wounded pattern, right? Toxic people are going to keep you in emotional competition with other people and keep you in competition with their exes and other, people. So they're going to basically threaten that they can just go find somebody better. I can find somebody better for you. I picked you. You know what I mean? And tons of other women want me, that kind of stuff, right? They're creating that emotional competition. A wounded person typically is not going to create competition, right? Which we'll get to in a second. The toxic person is going to reinforce control through jealousy or comparison, right? Or they're going to use guilt. They're going to guilt you into it. And they're guilting you into it by saying that this person thinks you're bad unless you change your behavior to where I'm asking you to do it. Okay. So they're reinforcing that control through it. The wounded person, right? It's usually because they don't know how to ask for reassurance. I like to use this term called uh, passive vulnerability. So, like passive aggressive, I'm going to be aggressive, but I'm not going to do it in a direct way. I'm going to do it in a passive way. Same thing here. When I want to be vulnerable, right? And I don't want to tell them that it was me that said this about them. I'm going to use other people to back me up so that way I look more credible when I say something, right? So if I want to say something is hurting me, but I don't want to tell them it's me that says it, I'm going to say, all these people think this about you in a certain way to get you to change your behavior because it's hurting me, but I don't want to tell you that. So I'm using triangulation. I'm using another group of people to hammer home my point. Okay. And that is a form of triangulation, but it's coming from a place of trauma because I don't know how to ask for reassurance. I don't know how to express that I'm hurting. I don't know how to tell you that I'm vulnerable about something, right? So I call it passive vulnerability when they're using something that you're doing as a problem, but they don't want to address it directly, if that makes sense. The wounded person, it usually comes from a fear of abandonment, and they don't know how to communicate directly, right? So when we get into the next couple red flags, they're all coming from a place of insecurity a lot of times, and knowing how they communicate differently. Because when we're insecure, when we have trauma wounds, a lot of times we don't know how to communicate our needs, our wants, our feelings, what's hurting us, what's not hurting us. We don't know how to communicate that. We don't know how to have conflict a lot of times. And so it's an immaturity in our ability to communicate that's causing the problem. And it comes out as triangulation. It comes out as passive aggressive. It comes out as guilt tripping. It comes out as love bombing, right? So again, as we're starting to see the picture here, we're starting to see that it's not necessarily that they have a toxic behavior, that it can be trauma from just not knowing how to communicate or being silenced whenever they've communicated in the past. A person may use that passive vulnerability when every time they've brought up something else in the same thing in a relationship previously, they were silenced over it. And that's a big, big problem. So we can see how some of this stuff is starting to get, starting to come across as, it's a trauma thing more than it is a narcissist thing, right? Some behavioral cues we want to look for early in dating, though, are bringing up exes constantly, usually to see how you react. Using others' opinions to invalidate your feelings. So again, like my ex was like, oh, you eat too fast, you talk too loud, you talk too slow, you don't talk enough. She's using that to control my behavior, to get me to act the way she wants me to act in a perfect world, right? And that, again, that target's going to change a lot of times. It's that moving target syndrome that they use. Okay. They're trying to trigger jealousy a lot of times subtly, right? My ex never used to do that. Now you're jealous of their action. Like, I got to be better than that. I got to be better than them. Why are you even picking me if that? So I gotta act better, right? So they're trying to trigger that jealousy. So how do we respond to it, right? I typically, I'm not comfortable having a conversation about another person's opinion that is not here to defend their opinion. That's one of the ones I use a lot. I'm not willing to have a conversation where we're bringing in somebody else's thoughts or opinions if I'm not able to question them about it. If they want to continue, I'll be like, okay, well, I'm just not having this conversation. I'll walk away because I'm not going to get baited into that. Again, it's taking the bait. If as soon as I start taking the bait and I'm defending myself, I am defending myself to a third party through this person. They get to control what that third party thinks of me. There's no way to win that argument. So no matter what I say, they're going to twist it in some way, shape, or form, because now they can tell me what that other person is thinking, the whys and everything. That's why I say, just tell them I'm not going to have a conversation about a third party's opinion of me without them present. I'm not comfortable being compared to others. If they're doing the my ex never used it, I'm not comfortable being compared to others. I'd rather focus on what's between us, right? I refuse to compete with other people. So if you're going to continue to bring up your ex and how I'm not like them or I am like them, we're just not going to be in a good, this is not a good relationship for me. Typically, a lot of times we see these behaviors. It's easier to just say, I'm not willing to stay in this relationship than it is to try to deal with this on a daily basis. Because once you're in it, and you get deep enough into it, it's going to be harder and harder to break free of it. So you got to be very, very careful of it. Okay. So again, I'm not comfortable being compared. I will not have a conversation about with a third party's opinion without them present to defend themselves and to have a conversation and interact with me on it. Just I refuse to compete, right? That's the one I refuse to compete with other people, and stuff like that. Right. Another way to do it is I name the behavior calmly without shaming. Like, look, it looks like you're trying to triangulate me and you're trying to get me dysregulated using a third party's opinion of me, right? And that doesn't seem right to me. So I'd just like to leave any third parties out of this. Typically, with someone that's doing it, they may all of a sudden be like, oh my gosh, you're right. That's the way a healthy person is going to respond. The way, or not a healthy person, but a person that is doing it out of trauma is going to respond like that. Again, if they double down and they triangulate you more, or they try to, a lot of times when they've triangulated and it doesn't work, they're going to flip flop to gaslighting. You're just crazy. You're crazy that you'd want to talk to that third person. Why can't you just believe me? You're crazy if you don't believe me, right? They're going to double down a lot of times. But again, if they self-correct after being called out on it, it's more than likely going to be insecurity. If they escalate, repeat the pattern, it's control. Okay. Kind of the same thing with most of these. If they double down on what they've said or done, it's typically going to end up being a form of manipulation, a form of control. So let's move into number 3, guilt tripping. I'm going to say the next two, it's guilt tripping and passive aggressive. Now, guilt tripping is a form of passive aggressive many times, but they are different. We're going to do a little thing in the middle here to show how they are. So what is guilt tripping though? Guilt tripping uses emotional pressure, obligation, or moral leverage to influence your choices. Okay. Guilt tripping is saying, like the obligation, like, I did this for you, so you should do this for me kind of thing. Right. The moral leverage is saying, that's not the right thing to do. Right. They're trying to get you to stop something you're doing by using that against you, that obligation, that emotional pressure. Right. So why do they do it? They're doing it to avoid rejection. They're doing it to control your behavior. To get what they want without directly asking. They're trying to get you to do something. Like, if you love me, you would do this, right? They're not directly asking. They're not saying, hey, I would like for you to do this for me, which is the direct way. The more direct our communication is with somebody, the more healthy we typically are. So if they're using passive aggressive or they're using, guilt tripping, a lot of times it means that they have something going on, either emotional insecurities, emotional immaturity. It doesn't necessarily mean behavioral disorder, but a lot of times direct communication stops all of that. And so, like, they don't know how to. And like I said, as we get into this, we figure out that the more emotionally immature someone is and not being able to name emotions and speak out about their needs and wants, typically because they don't even know what they are, that's them going to be guilt tripping because they don't have the vocabulary and the ability to articulate this to their partner. So they're going to use things like, if you loved me, you would do this, right? I've heard that one probably more than anything. Now, if it's a toxic pattern from a toxic person, it's going to be emotional blackmail. They know they're doing it wrong. The person that's doing it out of, I don't really know how to communicate, they're doing it out of protection. That's a wounded response. It's a wounded pattern. But toxicity is emotional blackmail because they know that they're going to get you to do what they want through it, right? They frame it typically as love framed as sacrifice. If you love me, you would do this. That's why I say that. It's more of a toxic pattern than it is a wounded response, right? So when they reframe it as, if you love me, it's typically more towards the toxic side. Doesn't mean it's always the case. Again, it takes a little bit more background in the dynamics between two people to understand which one it really is, right? But yeah, it's typically love framed as sacrifice is used that way. Shame If the person is using shame directly as leverage, it's going to be a problem, right? And that's a big one when we use that shame as leverage. Now, again, in wounded response, though, those people typically grew up in enmeshed or codependent dynamics, right? So they're going to have to regulate their emotions off the other person, and by doing that, they're going to guilt trip people into doing what they want because they're trying to regulate their emotions, right? I call it, like, a lot of times too, it's people pleasing, right? And a lot of people don't like hear that, but when we people please, and this is the hardest thing for a lot of people to understand, is that people pleasing is a way of prompting other people into doing what we want. We're trying to get them to give us validation. We're trying to get them to love us back. And so, in all honesty, when we are doing something for somebody, we are trying to make them feel obligated to do something in return for us. That's what people pleasing actually is. It's us trying to get a dopamine hit by giving them something to try to get them to do what we want. Now, that people pleasing can come out as needing validation for them to be obligated to do something in return, something like that. But those are all forms of guilt tripping. So people pleasing, a lot of times, it may look like we're trying to do the nice thing, but that's our way, our brain protecting from what's actually going on, which is us trying to prompt somebody into a behavior that we want, which is guilt tripping. So guilt tripping doesn't always have to be actual passive aggressive language, right? Because when we get into passive aggressive, it's a little bit different, right? But here it can be direct communication. If you love me, you would do this. That's not passive aggressive. That's telling the other person to do what you want. That's guilt tripping, like direct guilt tripping, I should say. Okay. So what does it look like early on in dating, and how do we kind of avoid that, right? I guess I just don't matter. I guess I'm just not important enough, right? Whenever someone says, I guess, or they say, well, a lot of times I always know that there's going to be some sort of passive aggressive comment coming after that. They might say something like, I can't believe you do that after everything I did for you. There's the guilt trip. They're basically trying to create a sense of obligation on what they did for you, right? Which is, we do this for us that are people pleasers. We start to resent people that don't do things back. In our brain, we may not say it to the person, but if internally you're like, man, after all I've done for you, this is how you treat me, you're trying to guilt trip them, even though you're not saying it to them. You may not be expressing it to them, but that should be a clear delineation that I'm trying to get them to do something out of obligation towards me because of what I've done for them. And that resentment starts to build. And that's why people pleasing causes so many problems, because we think it's the other person just not giving back. They're just not a nice person. When in all actuality, I'm trying to force myself onto somebody to get them to do what I want. That's guilt tripping. It's trying to get them to do something out of a sense of obligation. Okay. So it's very hard to just make them the problem if I'm a people pleaser, if I have wounds of my own that I have not fixed. That's why I say, get into a conversation with somebody that understands this stuff. We can ask questions to where we can see whether or not it's you throwing water on the fire or gasoline on the fire. And a lot of times, the more I get into coaching, the more I get people in that tell me, like, oh yeah, he's a narcissist. And in a conversation with them, I end up finding out that their partner is disorganized attachment style. I find out their partner just has a very hard time communicating emotions. That doesn't make them a narcissist. That just makes them emotionally immature. And we end up throwing more fire on it. We're actually damaging this person more by not allowing a safe space for them to communicate, but we're blaming them for all these bad behaviors. If you poke somebody long enough, they're going to lash out at you. And it's not fair to them that they lashed out. And just because you can say, oh, see, that's gaslighting. Oh, see, that's manipulation right there. Oh, that's this. We are literally now naming a behavior that we've caused by poking somebody too hard, by people pleasing to the point where they're not doing anything back. And they're like, look, see all this stuff I've done for you. We've now guilt tripped this person. Now we're mad at them for triangulating or abusing us in return, essentially, and trying to control us. So we've got to be very, very careful to understand that we can be doing some of these same things to another person, right? So some behavioral cues we want to be looking for, right? Withholds warmth until you conform, right? And a lot of times this is the we need to perform to get love kind of attitude or mentality, right? So we've got to watch out for somebody like is until they say they love me, I'm not going to tell them I love them back. Right? If they're withholding that warmth, if they're withholding touch until, like, I'm not going to touch them until they, tell me they love me. I'm going to wait for the words of affirmation I'm looking for to be warm with them. Right? And if that's the case, then yeah, that's a clear sign of guilt tripping. They're going to use self-pity to trigger guilt. I just hate myself. I guess I'm just a bad person, right? That's guilt tripping you, right? And a lot of times this type of guilt tripping may come out in an argument as a way to deflect away from something. So that's one thing we have to be looking for is deflection, right? So if you go to them and you're like, hey, this behavior that you just did, this thing that you just did, you're openly flirting with another girl, in the restaurant, and I didn't appreciate that much, right? This is where the guilt trip's going to come in. Because in all actuality, and I'll explain it in a second, they're trying to avoid the accountability and they want to deflect off of it, right? So they're going to be like, I guess I'm just a bad person. Because they damn well know that no one's going to be like, yes, you're a bad person. So now I'm trying to comfort their emotions that I caused because of what they did to cause emotions in me. So they're literally deflecting back to them, so that way you have to comfort them. Because everybody knows if you say, I guess I'm just a bad person, no one's going to say, yes, you are. So now the focus is off of what they did onto now how we've got to comfort and console their emotions about how they feel bad about themselves. That's self-pity in order to get you to guilt you into looking away from the bad behavior that they just did. So now it's not about the behavior, it's about how they feel. So they literally put the spotlight on their feelings and make that more important, right? And this happens a lot, more so with men that do this. Men will give their emotions, and the woman will a lot of times guilt trip him into where now he's having to console her over her feelings. And this happens way more in the men to women dynamic than it happens the other way around. Women, I know you guys are great and all, but you have a tendency to use guilt tripping a lot more with men when they open up about their emotions and say that they have hurt you. I find this more often from men telling me that women do this than anything else. So be careful of it, right? Don't use self-pity to try to trigger guilt in your man if he's being open with you about a way that he's hurt you. Some other behavioral cues, or one more behavioral cue, is they frame independence as abandonment, right? I guess she's going to leave me, like that kind of stuff. Like, we're going to use it as a way of feeling abandoned, okay? Now, how do we respond to it, right? Well, somebody does that guilt tripping or whatever, I'm going to basically set kind of a boundary, right? I care about you, but at the same time, I'm allowed to have boundaries that don't allow me to do X, Y, and Z for you, right? That doesn't mean that I don't care about you, I'll say. Like, I care about you, but me not wanting to do this one thing is not me saying I don't care about you. It's saying that I have to set boundaries with myself, right? Don't over-explain. We don't have to tell somebody, well, I can't do that because blah, 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 right? Like, so if they use the phrase like, I can't believe you do that ever after everything I did for you. Typically, like, I don't want to over-explain. I'll just say, it's very nice that you did all those things for me. However, I'm not capable of responding and giving you that back. That's it. I don't need to over explain because I don't have the energy. I'm not the same type of person. Blah, 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 blah. Don't do it. Just very clearly state, like, that's very nice that you did that for me, but I'm not capable of reciprocating in the fashion that you have already given to me. That's it. We don't want to over explain, right? One thing we can do in the short term to get out of it is redirect the conversation to mutual responsibility. Right. So I'm not redirecting away from it, but they're like, I can't believe you do that after everything I did for you. And again, I understand that, I've done this for you, but that does not obligate me to do anything for you. So you need to take accountability for the fact that you did it out of a place of needing something in return and you did not communicate that to me. Right? I always say a uncommunicated expectation is a premeditated resentment. This is where a lot of times guilt tripping comes from, is from they expect something of you that they did not tell you they expected. You don't do it, and then they're mad at you, and it comes out with, I can't believe you do that after everything I did for you. So again, just redirecting, like, we both need to take accountability of our own sides of this. We do not need to sit there and play the blame game and all that stuff. We need to clearly state, like, okay, I did this, or you did this for me. That does not obligate me to do that from you. If you wanted that in return, all you'd have to do is ask for it. So it's your responsibility to do that. It's my responsibility to, act in the most loving way that I possibly can. And in the time I'm not capable of doing that, you can't expect me to do that. Okay. So just redirecting that conversation into mutual responsibility, as opposed to trying to defend, deflect, or comfort their emotions. I always say that they are responsible for their emotions. So if they're going to try to guilt trip you using self-pity, I'm not going to play into it. Like, I guess I'm just a bad person. I will immediately be like, if that's how you feel about yourself, you're welcome to feel that way. I did not say that about you,
But if that's how you feel, then you own that feeling, right? I'm redirecting and then making them take responsibility and also saying, I didn't say that. You're putting that in my head, right? So it very clearly is calling out the behavior right then and there. And it's redirecting into now we need to take responsibility on both ends of this, if that makes sense. So the discernment tip here is, do they soften when reassured and respect your choice? Right? Like if they say, I guess I just don't matter, and you say, no, you do matter. I just can't do that for you. If they double down, if they escalate, if they continue to point fingers and blame you, then we have a problem. But if they're like, you know what, you're right. I do matter to you. It's just so hard to see sometimes. If they soften, it's coming from a place of trauma. It's not coming from a place of toxicity, right? So, anyways, let's move on to the next one. I'm going to go into this sidebar real quick about, is guilt tripping a form of passive aggression? Yes, guilt tripping is often a form of passive aggression. They share the same core feature: indirect control of your behavior through emotional discomfort. That's the one thing that they share. Okay, how they differ, right? Guilt tripping uses guilt and shame directly. Passive aggressive uses sarcasm, silence, or withdrawal. Okay, they're literally going to use sarcasm. I guess I'm just such a bad person, right? That's still passive aggressive and still a little bit towards guilt tripping. It's more towards the passive aggressive when they use that sarcastic tone, right? Guilt tripping, the tone is hurt or victimized, right? That they're the ones that are hurting. A lot of times they guilt trip you when you bring in their feelings, like, they're gonna use that self pity again, right? They're the victim, right? Whereas the passive aggressive, the tone is cold, indirect, or punishing, right? Guilt tripping, the primary message is, you're hurting me. Passive aggressive is, figure it out yourself, right? You do you. You end up hurt, and instead of communicating that you're hurt, you're like, you do you. You just go do your own thing. No worries, right? That kind of stuff. So let's talk about passive aggression then, right? What is passive aggression? Is indirect punishment, emotional withdrawal, or covert hostility, right? Why are they doing it? Again, they wanted to, like most people that are in this position, this one is very easy to be misconstrued as one or the other, either behavioral or that. We say, oh, there's a narcissist. Oh, well, they're just having trauma, because this comes from a person that does not know how to, they avoid direct conflict at all costs. They don't know how to have conflict. So in order to express their needs, they're going to do so in a very indirect method, because it's saying, I'm not saying this is a problem, or I'm making a joke about it. So that way, if you do take it seriously, then you change your behavior. If you don't take it seriously, I can say, oh, I was just joking, right? It's very, very easy to do that with this one, okay? They use it to express anger or control through silence, right? They'll just shut up on you, won't talk to you, that kind of thing. They're using it to protect their pride a lot of times. So again, in the toxic pattern versus the wounded pattern, the toxic pattern's using silence or sarcasm to control outcomes. They're going to punish without clarity or communication, and it's going to escalate when not addressed, right? Whereas the wounded response, it's like where we grew up, where honesty felt dangerous. So I don't even know how to be honest. Like if I'm honest, I get scolded for it. So like if somebody asks me my opinion on something, I give them my opinion, and they're like, well, that's stupid. Now I don't want to give my opinion. So I'm going to give my opinion in a very indirect way through sarcasm as a way of coping with that, right? But again, that's not the way a toxic person, they're not using it to express an actual genuine emotion. They're using it because it's a form and way of controlling how you act. That's it. Has nothing to do with them trying to like hide their own emotions behind it. Because again, a narcissist has a lack of empathy, a lack of emotions. So they don't need to hide any of their emotions. They're using it just to control. Whereas the person that has trauma, they have emotions that they don't know how to express that are inside of them. And so they use it as a way of expressing themselves. Okay. Again, the wounded person, it's typically because they're avoiding conflict out of fear, not avoiding conflict as a way to control. And that's the difference between the two of them. So what does it sound like early on in dating, right? They may say things early on in dating. Again, it develops and it gets worse as it goes. So seeing these signs isn't going to tell me one way or the other, but it's going to tell me that they are somebody that's going to potentially escalate this further. It's fine. Do what you want, right? I'm okay. Do what you want. That's a clear early sign in dating, that there's some passive aggressive going on, because it's probably not fine. That's why we say this with women all the time, right? When a woman says, I'm fine, she's not really fine. That's passive aggressive. Women, you need to stop doing that. If it's not fine, tell your man why it's not fine. That is healthy, direct communication. You are then at that point, if you say it's fine, again, you are not communicating an expectation to him, and he's going to have a premeditated resentment. And then you're going to get mad at him for resenting you because you didn't communicate what you wanted. Women say they want men to open up. You're not opening up either when you're saying it's fine. You want him to draw it out of you. It's not fair to either side of it. So be careful of that. It's fine. Do what you want. Communicate directly with somebody. And if you can't, and your go-to is it's fine, do what you want, I'm going to tell you right now, you need to take a hard look. That means you're emotionally immature. You do not know how to articulate your stuff. Now, granted, that person might not be creating a safe space. And if that's the case, you need to communicate that to them as well as whatever it is that you're not fine about. But that means that there's some communication barriers that are going to destroy that relationship in time. And you have to get past it. You have to get better at these things. Otherwise, you're not going to have healthy relationships. Another one that early on goes silent when upset. Let's say you have like a little disagreement very early on in dating, and they go silent. They're just like, well, I'm just not going to talk. That right there is huge. Okay. It's huge. Going silent for no reason, right? When you have an argument is a clear sign of passive aggressive. Okay. They might make sarcastic comments, and then say things like, I was just joking. That's not healthy at all. Like, come on, I was just joking. Like, you're fat. Come on, I was just joking, right? They're not. That's actually, a lot of times I say, if it's passive aggressive like that, has that sarcasm, the truth is there. They're just trying to mask the truth using that tone of voice. The truth is it's still the exact same. So if they're calling you fat, they think you're actually fat, right? It's not, I'm just joking. I'm just joking is kind of like, nothing said before the word but matters, right? So if someone says, I love you, but the but just kind of throws everything else out. The I'm joking just throws the whole comment out, meaning it actually is what they're thinking. They're just trying to cover it because they're vulnerable about saying they think something about you, right? And they're saying it in a bad way. Okay. Somebody that withdraws affection without explanation. So if somebody suddenly feels disconnected, I mean, it could be other things going on, but if like everything is warm and all sorts of things are going on and they just suddenly withdraw affection, they're trying to draw their partner into a conversation and they don't know how to start the conversation to articulate their needs. So they're going to go silent and they're not going to do things. They're going to withdraw from you in order to get you to chase, to get you into the conversation so that they can blame you as why they were doing what they're doing. Right? Like this happens a lot. Again, I hate to go to women because women use passive aggressive behavior way more than men. And what they'll do, and we joke about this one on the internet. There's memes about this. A woman would be like, don't talk to me. And she'll go in the other room. And then there's like these memes of her sitting in the other room going, why isn't he coming to talk to me? You were just passive aggressive with him. And men deal way better with direct communication. Tell me how you're feeling and tell me how I hurt you. And I will figure out a way to not do it if I'm healthy. We do not do well with trying to read between the lines and do stuff like that. So it's important that we don't do that kind of stuff where it's like, don't talk to me. I'm done talking for the evening. And then go to the room and then get mad at him for not coming into that room. You were passive aggressive. He takes it as direct communication. He thinks he's respecting your boundaries of don't talk to me. And then we get mad at him for not talking to us. How can you get mad at a man for actually respecting your boundary? Don't talk to him. Okay. So be careful of these ones. The withdrawing affection, saying it's fine or going silent and all those things. But very early on in dating, that's what it's going to look like. That's going to get worse as time goes on. Okay. So if we catch it very early and we know how to respond to it, we can call it out. When someone's being passive aggressive, I will very clearly stop the conversation and say, I can see something is bothering you. I'd rather just talk directly than try to guess at what's going on. So if you're not willing to have that kind of conversation where you directly tell me what's going on, I'm done with this conversation. I'm not going to deal with any passive aggressiveness. I'll cut the conversation off right there. Boom, done. Right? Now, what I'll say is I also hold space, but I don't chase or decode. Right? I'm not going to assume any meanings. That's where I use those comments like something's bothering you. I can see that you're upset, something like that. And I can see you're upset. When you're ready to talk about it, let's talk about it directly. That's holding that space for that person without having to chase or decode. Not trying to say, are you mad about this? Are you mad about this? Don't do that. Don't try to fish for what's actually wrong with them. Because if we do, we are now enabling them to do this again and again and again and again. If I want to be healthy for them, I have to hold them accountable for what they're doing. And I have to call them out on their behavior and then say, okay, it's your turn to communicate in a healthy manner. I'm not gonna jump into this with you and now try to decode what you're saying and try to make assumptions, because I'm going to end up making an ass out of myself. I'm going to end up hurting somebody in the process because I'm not inside your head. I don't know. Okay. Now, then I want to also model honesty with safety when I'm in those kinds of situations. Like, if I've hurt your feelings, I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings, but I need to know what it is in order to, to fix it. We need to model that safety, right? This is a safe space where we can talk. We can't do that if I get passive aggressive back or I start like feeding into this back. I need to make a clear delineation that I can see that something's bothering them because they're being passive about something bothering them. They're trying to mask that something's bothering them. Calling them out on it is saying, I see you. Now I'm holding space when you're ready to talk about it. And I'm willing to have an honest conversation with safe space. I'm not gonna make fun of you for anything that you're feeling. And I will hold that space with you. But that also means that I have to be healthy going into that kind of conversation. Because if I'm wounded, I'm going to end up being defensive back, which defensive is not a form of manipulation, but it's a trauma response that we're going to have to people doing some of these things. So if two people, this is where I say a lot of times people think that they're in a relationship with a toxic person when really it's mutually dysfunctional, right? It's not a trauma bond. It's mutually dysfunctional because we are both being dysfunctional in a certain way, and that playing off each other is making it look like it's a toxic bond, right? So we got to be very, very careful that, again, I'm not throwing gasoline on a fire. I'm throwing water on a fire. Throwing water on a fire is me coming from a place of space, of strength, healed energy, stuff like that. But I can't get there unless I've done the work on myself first. So again, discernment tip on this one. Wounded people may open up when trust builds. So they may be passive aggressive first, but as soon as you start continually showing them that you're healthy and that you're safe, they can talk, that passive aggressiveness will drop, right? That's the way. So you can outlast passive aggressive behavior as they feel comfortable and trusting of you, right? Manipulators escalate silence or sabotage when you push for truth. So if you say something like, if I can see something's bothering you, let's just talk directly. If they double down, if they escalate, if they get more passive aggressive, that's telling you that they're more than likely trying to manipulate you with it. This is where you just say, I'm done with this conversation. If you're going to continue to speak like that, if you're not willing to speak in a direct manner, I'm done with the conversation. I'm walking away. That's the clearest, quickest way to discern whether or not it's manipulation or just a wounded person. Okay. The last one we're going to talk about, I know we're a little bit over on time here, but that's all right. Well, this will just be a long one today. Now, the last one, this one, again, people are going to roll their eyes and say, oh, I know this one. But I'm going to illustrate why this does not mean it's necessarily a narcissist or a personality disorder, but love bombing. Everyone roll your eyes. Go ahead. I'll give you a minute to have a moment of silence for love bombing, right? Love bombing is excessive flattery, affection, commitment, right? Using the like fast track emotional dependency kind of method, right? Why do people do that? Well, to secure attachment quickly. So when I say to secure attachment quickly, narcissists do it because they need a source of energy and validation to hold them up. And let's say they broke up with somebody, they need someone to keep their validation up. So they're going to quickly do it to get you there. But somebody that has just come out of a relationship, it's on a rebound, right? And they are finding it hard to understand who they are. They find it hard to function without that other person's validation that they were codependent on a lot of times. They're going to love bomb you to try to get that connection back with you. So again, it may not be coming from a personality disorder. It may be coming straight from emotional immaturity. It might be coming from a trauma wound from their last relationship. It does not necessarily mean they have a behavioral disorder, right? Why else do they do? Create emotional loyalty before showing their true self. So this one is more or less why a narcissist does it. They're trying to get you hooked emotionally to them, so that way their bad behaviors can come out. And again, that means that intent is different on both of those two. If a person is doing it because they know they're a bad person, right? Narcissists, they don't like to admit they're a bad person, but they know they're hard to deal with. All narcissists know that. And so they want to make sure they've got a good source of validation. So they love bomb you. So that way you love bomb them back. That way they've got you now hooked. Now they can be their true self without fear of you going anywhere. Because narcissists have a fear of being alone more than anybody. They have a fear of abandonment more. How dare you abandon me kind of mentality, right? Right. They also do it to bypass emotional pacing. And that way they can get you hooked in a very fast manner. But again, the person that's doing it from a place of I'm hurt from my previous relationship, and the person that's doing it because I want to control you and I want to be able to show my true self eventually, it's two different intents. It's very hard to determine which one's really going on, but there can be some signs, as time goes on, that that's what's actually going on. But we won't know that unless we do a little bit of digging, right? And that's where, again, asking someone like a coach or a therapist to walk you through it, right, is priceless. And if we think we're with a good person that's just emotionally immature and they may need help, and we're afraid of leaving that person because we don't want to abandon them, book a one-on-one session one time with me. I don't have to put you through a program. We can sit and talk about what your situation is, so that way you can gain some discernment on which direction do I need to go here, right? And to understand whether or not this person just needs a little bit of love, or whether or not they need a boundary and they need to be held accountable for their behavior and need to walk away. But you won't know that, but you'll be able to feel better walking away from a conversation with a coach or a therapist that you're making the right decision, and it makes that decision, while still hard, easier to stomach walking away from that type of person, knowing you're not abandoning him. Okay. So in a toxic person, they're using it as charm as a way of controlling you, right? And it's going to disappear or turns cold after you're invested. So after they've gotten you to say, I love you and all that stuff, that's when their behavior is going to start to turn, right? And a lot of times too, love bombing can come out as future faking, things like that. But we have to watch out for it. We're going to talk about what it sounds like, but it's going to disappear typically between the 3 to 6 month mark. So if we're saying, I love you, having sex with somebody, and they're like doting on you with gifts and you're so beautiful, you're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen, and I can see a future with you. If they're doing that in the 1 to 2, 3 months, and then it slowly fizzles and it's not there anymore, then that's a sign that they love bombed you to get you attached. Very clearly. Okay. They might the toxic pattern is also going to be followed by withdrawal, guilt tripping, or control. So they're going to love bomb you, and love bombing in a toxic pattern is always followed by a switch flip, right? Whereas love bombing in a person that's trauma bonded, or not trauma bonded, that is gone through trauma, is typically going to be like love bombing, and it just kind of fizzles out, but nothing else appears. It's just like all of a sudden they just kind of go cold, right? Once they've got you, there's no more manipulation. But a toxic person, that what they're going to do is they're going to do that, then they're going to start like breadcrumbing. They're going to pull all of their attention back to get you to pursue in, right? And then they're going to love bomb you. As soon as you start look like you're backing away, they'll love bomb you again. They get close again. So they use love bombing as a way of dysregulating by keeping you on this emotional roller coaster of huge ups and huge lows, right? So again, it's always followed by that withdrawal, sometimes guilt tripping, because they're going to do all this nice stuff for you, right? And then the guilt tripping comes in like, oh, I've done all this stuff for you, and you can't do this one thing for me. Now they're going to guilt trip you, and they're going to slam you back down, because now they're not going to give attention. They're going to pull all their attention away. They're going to be passive aggressive with their love, and in order to get you to do what they want to do. And then once you do, you're probably going to be exhausted, not going to be able to put anything else in, and then they're going to love bomb you again to get you filled back up, and then they're going to do it again to you. And it's a cycle that's going to happen over and over again in those, where it's like love bombing, breadcrumbing, love bombing, breadcrumbing, love bombing, breadcrumbing. Now, I'll say the other thing that I kind of noticed over the years in all my work with people that have gone through abusive relationships with trauma, like a narcissist, is that narcissists will change tactics repeatedly when one doesn't work or it's not working as well. Like literally midday, they can switch from one tactic to another tactic, to one tact to another tactic, right? So we have to understand that, to label it as a toxic behavior, if they just have gaslighting and it never really transpires anything else, if they just triangulate and it doesn't really go into anything else, it's probably not toxic. But when we have a love bomber that then breadcrumbs, that then guilt trips, that then gets mad at you, then asks for pity from you, then tries to play the victim with you, like if they keep doing that, they're trying to figure out what works, and they're keeping you on your toes because they're constantly changing what they're doing. They're all over the place, and that's dysregulating you. So to not take the bait, we have to take a step back and be like, look, we need some distance and space so I can formulate my thoughts. We need to create a better way of communicating, to where we're communicating from a place of logic when we have regulated our nervous system. As soon as they've dysregulated, that means your nervous system is not responding accurately anymore. We are responding out of emotion. We're not responding out of logic. That's what they're trying to do, because everybody's going to get emotional. When someone distorts our reality and we don't think something happens, it's going to anger us. Like, I do not remember it that way. Quit calling me a bad person, right? And it gets you emotionally dysregulated, because when you respond out of emotion, you're responding out of the wrong way of thinking. And that's why, like in my book, Trigger Control, I talk so heavily on breathing through a lot of these things to be able to bring yourself back down into a logic space. Because if they keep you in your amygdala where all that fear and that emotion's at, we are going to say some things we don't mean. We're going to do things we don't want to do. And that's typically, like, you can see it very clearly. We get out of an argument with somebody, right? And then hours later, we're like, man, I totally should have said this. Or, man, I should not have said this. That was so mean to say to that person. And we regret what we have said. That means that we responded from our amygdala, not our prefrontal cortex. The only way to stop that from happening is to breathe in the situation, ground ourselves, not get dysregulated, and play into that bait. If we can do that long enough, we can let that message ride through the amygdala, through our fear center, into the prefrontal cortex where our logic center is, and we can formulate great thoughts of what's actually going on. We'll never get there if we don't start breathing better, if we don't start grounding ourselves in those moments. So it's very important that we understand that manipulators, they feed off of getting you to make fast decisions made off emotion, not logic. So a lot of times if somebody's pushing me to make a decision on something very quickly, I'll tell them, look, give me 24 hours. Give me 24 hours. We'll come back to this conversation. Because typically I'm going to feel very different for it from that conversation I'm in right now. I'm going to feel very different 24 hours from now. So by waiting that long, it definitely helps the situation to be able to understand what's really going on and logically process through it all to the point where I can actually come up with a good solution to whatever problem it is, right? But I see somebody saying emotions are bad. No, they're not. Emotions are actually one of the best things that we have as a tool. If you think they're bad, that means you're avoiding them. Emotions are telling you something about a situation. Whether or not you want to believe what they're saying about the situation is another story. And understanding your emotions and how they all play to trigger your nervous system will make you understand how to react better in those situations. Okay? Emotions are not bad. They are literally feedback telling your body what you are feeling in a moment and why, right? If you want to say they're bad, that means you're going to turn away from them. If you turn away from them, you're actually ignoring clear signs that something's about to happen, bad or good. Okay. So that's all I got for you guys tonight on this one. Just remember, these forms of manipulation do not mean that somebody is immediately a narcissist, right? It takes years to learn how to, I don't even diagnose, right? But what I do is I tell people, like, let's look at it from different angles. Could it be this? Could it be that? So a lot of times in coaching, like, I'm not going to say I don't have people that aren't narcissists. I have clear as day. I'm pretty sure this group over here are narcissists, but I have countless people, about the same amount, that come to me with narcissistic issues, that come to me with issues that they say are narcissists. And by digging deeper, we get to a point where we realize that it's just childhood wounds. It's attachment differences. Like, the push-pull dynamic of a disorganized attachment style can absolutely feel like a narcissist, because they love bomb to get you to come towards them because they're feeling anxious. And as soon as they get you love and attention, they don't know what to do with it. They're going to push you away, and they're going to look like they're breadcrumbing you. And they're going to do that back and forth when that's an attachment issue that they have, because they do not know how to regulate their own emotions. So they use you to regulate it to get the attention that they need, and they push you away to be able to regulate the fact that they don't like the emotions that they're feeling. Okay, so it's very important that we don't diagnose anybody, that we let somebody else do the diagnosis, but go to people that understand how to combat the actual tactics they're using. We don't say, this is how I deal with a narcissist. This is how I deal with gaslighting. This is how I deal with defensiveness. This is how I deal with this. This is how I deal with triangulation. This is how I deal with this one over here. I teach you how to deal with that, not how to deal with a narcissist. I teach you how to get out of the situation if it gets too bad. I teach you how to set boundaries so that way we don't allow the manipulation to take control over us. Because in a lot of cases, if you are with a narcissist, you're gonna have to learn that stuff anyways. Because you're probably, if you're married to them, have kids, you're gonna have a ton of these conversations for the rest of your life. You're probably connected to that person because you have kids with them. So we're gonna have to learn how to deal with their tactics, not deal with the fact they're a narcissist, right? A lot of times what people do is they want to label somebody as a narcissist, as a borderline personality disorder, as bipolar, whatever. You're doing that so that way you refuse to take accountability for, again, where you were gasoline on the fire. You're going to refuse to take accountability for your bad behaviors that have made things worse as well. Okay, so don't diagnose anybody unless you actually have a degree in it. And I mean, even a therapist can't really diagnose through what somebody is telling them. I'm only getting one side of the story. I'd actually have to see that person in person before I'd be able to know. Okay. But that's all I got for you guys tonight. I'll try to respond to some of the Facebook comments here. Just be on the lookout. This will get posted to the YouTube channel. If you're not on the YouTube channel, there on the Facebook side, you guys should be able to see a link on this video that takes you straight there. Get yourself on there if you want to watch the replay. But there's another great course here, guys. A lot of good information. If you have any questions, send me a direct message. I know I try to get to as many as I can. I get a lot of people sending me random stuff, random reels and things, so it's sometimes hard for me to get through all the stuff that I get sent. But I try to get to anybody that has questions about these specific things or has a need for coaching. But I got some things in the works coming up. I'm going to potentially start bringing some guests onto this show to have conversations with people that have been through some traumatic experiences so I can get their take and maybe even see what coaching kind of looks like from the inside out. With some people that are going to come in here. But that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. We start a fresh new week. You guys know how I am. I love Mondays. Monday is my day to get back on my schedule, back into consistency and discipline so I can regulate myself again. But other than that, everybody stay safe, keep the faith, never let them grind you down. Thanks, guys.